about this particular month's program, a video link. This program is being recorded, so you can share it with your friends. It will also be on our social media platforms, so you'll get all that information. You'll also get an email with reference resources and information about Sonya. But I did want to mention that opportunity to contribute. You saw about the mission of both of our organizations. If you're not familiar with the Village Green, I encourage you to come visit, especially on a beautiful day like today. And hopefully we will once again be able to return to in-person large gatherings. We actually are already in conversations about what that's going to look like come June 1st when the governor eases restrictions. But again, welcome, and we hope you enjoy this evening's presentation. I'm going to introduce now to you Julie Schott, who is my colleague who served as the development director for the Highlands Cashers Land Trust, and she's going to bring a word of welcome from the Land Trust as well as introduce Sonya. Julie?
Thank you, Anne. So it is no doubt that the Highlands Cashers Plateau has a very rich natural and cultural heritage, but it's also a magnet for talent. It's amazing to me how many remarkable people call the plateau home, and this evening's presenter is no exception. Sonya, if you've met her, you know what I'm talking about. We have been working in the same circles for years. I have the utmost respect for her. She is a go-to on the plateau. She knows so much about our landscape, and she knows how to care for it, and she has a passion for caring for our natural world. Sonya and Canty are the co-owners of a landscape company based in Highlands dedicated to creating and maintaining gardens in balance with the natural world. She studied ecology at the University of Florida and supplied her knowledge of ecology to design of planned natural communities such as pollinator gardens. She served for 9 years as the director of the Highlands Biological Foundation and is currently helping them to manage their new North Campus improvement project at the Highlands Biological Station. She's also president of the Highlands Plateau Greenway and the Highlands Bee City Coordinator, an initiative to increase knowledge of and create habitat for our native pollinator species. So without further ado, I would like to introduce Sonya Carpenter.
Thank you so much, Julie, and thank you to the Village Green and to the Highlands Cashers Land Trust for inviting me today. I'm so pleased to be with you. I think we can all agree that this past year has been very difficult. So many people across the planet have lost their lives or their livelihood. And I think it's safe to say that every single one of us has lost time with family and loved ones or opportunities to do things that we love to do. So today I wanted to focus on things that we can do, choices that are within our control, and ways that we can nurture nature here in our own environment. I hope, like millions of Americans, you have discovered how the natural world can provide solace. It's wonderful for relieving anxiety and stress, something we all certainly need right now. And if you're familiar with the work of Richard Louv, you've probably heard about this book. This ability of the natural world to lower our blood pressure and reduce stress is something that he calls vitamin N. And there's a lot of studies, and Richard Louv has covered so much of this material in his excellent books about how the natural world can really help us. It makes us healthier. His book called Last Child in the Woods was a real wake-up call for all of us on this alarming trend for young people to spend less and less time in the natural world. This is a picture of my daughter Claire when she was about 5 years old, and she's just illustrating to you how much fun kids can have in the natural world. But now she's 13 and she spends a lot more time on her iPad than she does in the natural world. And that makes me sad because we need all of our children, we need the next generation to really understand the importance of our ecosystems and the services that they provide. But we're here to celebrate Earth Day. It's one of my favorite holidays. And this year, the theme of Earth Day is Restore Our Earth. And to me, this tagline, Restoring Our Earth, it's a nod to the evolution in our thinking about conservation. Conservation's been around for a very long time. And back in 1916, our country did something very smart. We created the national parks. And this was such a wonderful idea. It's these iconic places like Yellowstone and the Grand Canyon, where you can go and see the natural world with this tremendous awe factor. But in addition to being a great thing, it also had some downsides. It gave us the impression that nature happens elsewhere, that nature can be contained within these protected areas. And what we realize now in the world of conservation is that is not enough. We need to have nature everywhere. In our fragmented landscape, it's important to have corridors and natural areas throughout our living space. And so you're thinking, well, we live here on the Highlands Plateau, which is a geographical area that includes both highlands and cachers, and it is a biodiversity hotspot. Many of you probably already know this, that we have a tremendous number of trees and shrubs and perennials and insects and birds. It's a wonderful place. And there's a lot of reasons why we're a biodiversity hotspot. I'm just going to kind of go through them pretty quickly because this is a lot of information. It could be a whole nother talk in and of itself. But one of the reasons is because of the age of the Appalachian Mountains. We know that these are some of the oldest mountains in the world, not the oldest, but very, very old. Geologists believe them to be somewhere between 450 and 500 million years old. And that's a very long time for species to begin differentiation. Now, this age is very important, but another important factor is that in all that time, we've never been covered by ocean waves or by glaciers. Another important factor is our precipitation. We get a lot of rain here in Highlands, and we're actually classified as a rainforest. We get an average of 84 inches of rain per year, and last year we had over 100. But in addition to getting a lot of rain, we don't have a dry season. This precipitation that we get comes throughout the entire year. And that's a critically important factor for species like salamanders, where drying out means death. One more important factor is the orientation of the Appalachian Mountains. They run roughly north to south. So during the ice ages, the glaciers pushed many of our northern species down into our the southern Appalachians. And when the glaciers receded again, many of those species found good niches in our elevational ecosystems, our little ecotomes. So here, it is a place where we have both northern and southern species where they all collide. So maybe you're thinking, let me go back one. Maybe you're thinking, okay, we're good here. We don't have to talk about the natural world. We live in a wonderful place. Not quite. There's still a lot that we can do to protect our environment because we are privileged to live here, and with great privilege comes great responsibility. So today I want to talk to you about 5 different things that you can do in your own backyard to protect and preserve this wonderful environment that we live in. The first is non-native invasive plant removal. You probably know the characters that I'm talking about. This is English ivy, vinca, oriental bittersweet, burning bush, and kudzu, just to name a few. These are species that were planted here. We brought them in, but we did not bring their predators with them. So these plants have run amok in our landscape. Here's a good example. This is English ivy, and I have a confession to make. This is my yard, and it's awful. Nobody wants to come to this party. It's all English ivy. And in an effort to practice what I preach, I got out there on Sunday and I got rid of most of that ivy. I still have a long way to go, but the best approach is to get out there and get rid of it. What I'm hoping is that underneath all that ivy, there's an active seed bank that will come back with native plants. And I will be persistent in removing the ivy and the vinca that was in there until it's all gone. I want to introduce you to a great program that we have here on the plateau. They call themselves SNPM, which is the Coalition for Non-Native Invasive Plant Management. This is a great local organization that we have, and each year they hold a symposium to teach our local landowners and landscapers on how the dangers of these non-native invasive plants and how to get rid of them. I'm hoping they'll have another conference this summer, so keep an eye out for it. I'll send some information to you later in that email. The second thing that we can do to protect our environment is to shrink your lawn. Americans have a very unhealthy obsession with our lawns. To us, they often represent status or to show our neighbors that we are good citizens within our community. A well-clipped lawn is the sign that you're a part of the team. But at what cost? To maintain these monocultures, we use tons and tons of fertilizers, insecticides, and herbicides, all of which end up in our groundwater and as runoff that end up in our rivers and are exactly why every major river that we have has a dead zone where it meets the sea. And that is really sad. It also uses a lot of fossil fuels to keep these lawns all clipped and perfectly manicured, not to mention the time and energy we invest in this one single species, the grass. Now here's a man I want to introduce you to if you don't already know him, and we're going to talk about him a little bit later too. But Doug Tallamay's got this great idea. He says if half of our lawns were replaced with native plants, we could create a new national park. And it would be so large that it would be 9 times bigger than Yellowstone or 100 times bigger than the Shenandoah National Park. What a great proposition. Let's create our own national park out of half our lawns. Now, as a designer, I understand that lawns do play an important role from a design perspective. They create negative space, which allows your perennial borders to really pop. But they don't have to be so large. We can reduce them. Another thing that turf grass offers is walkability. You can step on turf grass and it doesn't really bother it too much. But why not reserve our turf grass for walkways in areas where you can get around your garden, but it's not the main attraction? One other thing that we do is we try and keep our lawn free of weeds. Why are we doing that? It's so much effort and so unnecessary. Let the weeds bloom in your yard. Have yourself a country lawn. They're beautiful and they can help service our wildlife that lives all around us. We have a neat opportunity right now. It's to be mow aware. So the idea there is to just put up your lawnmower for a couple weeks and let the bees utilize those early spring blooming weeds that pop up in your lawn. Instead of hating the dandelion, just let it be. It's not the best forage for bees, but it's not too bad. You can also leave your grass a little bit higher. There's nothing that says your grass has to be as short as possible. Leave it a bit longer, and that allows lots of species like the box turtle to better survive in your lawn landscape. Then another opportunity coming up is called No Mow May. So last year, in the midst of the pandemic, we participated in No Mow May over in my garden. This is actually my property here where I live. And we liked it so much, we kind of kept it going. We let all of these flowering plants here is native salvia, and they were blooming and it was so pretty. So instead of cutting it all, we cut paths through it and created a knee-high labyrinth. That was so much fun that my daughter, and this is my niece Arden, used it and we walked around. It became a main attraction at in our garden, and it was lovely. And it also supported many, many species of insects, which we loved. Here's a success story I wanted to tell you about. This is the Peggy Crosby Center over in Highlands. It's where the Highlands Cashers Land Trust has their office, so hopefully you're familiar with it. This was once a bank that was constantly mowed, and it was becoming degraded and eroded. And so we had this idea, well, what if we plant native species in that grassy area and let them grow? And it's become this beautiful garden now. But to combat the idea that sometimes these plantings like this can look a little weedy, the board over at the Peggy Crosby Center put in this sign that says, "Flower Garden in Progress." I think we can all agree that this is definitely some progress here in the garden, but it points to the understanding that sometimes we have to educate each other about the need for native plants and why we're turning our garden, our lawn
You're gonna
into
have it?
garden space.
Oh yeah, whatever he wants. I don't care.
I'll buy you a few minutes.
The third thing that we can do, and we must do, is to think of insects as essential to our garden. Insects are very important, and we have to let them stop bugging us. There's no need for that. Look at this beautiful butterfly. It's become one of my favorite things to go out and watch the butterflies in my garden. Insects perform very important ecological services. For example, they pollinate flowering plants. Most of our flowering plants are pollinated by insects. Very few of them are wind pollinated, and insects are responsible for that. They also convert the energy from plants into protein, which is what almost every other animal on the planet utilizes for their energy. They break down organic matter, and in short, without insects, our whole ecosystem would collapse. Now, I did not set out to be an insect advocate, but the more I learn about environmentalism and conservation and ecosystem preservation, the more I realize how vitally important it is. And this man has really convinced me. This is Dr. Doug Calamy, and he is a professor of ecology and entomology at the University of Delaware. And he has spent the last 30 years or so researching and writing wonderful books about the importance of insects and restoring nature all across the globe. This book, Nature's Best Hope, is one I hope you will look into. It's a great book. He also wrote a book called Bringing Nature Home, which is equally great. And he's recently written a book specifically about oak species because he recognizes the importance that oaks play in our environment. Maybe you have heard that there's an insect apocalypse at foot. Back in 2008, the New York Times Magazine put out this article alerting us to this danger. And you maybe think, oh, that could be some hyperbole. But I wanted to put together a little demonstration to better help all of us understand. This is the block that I grew up in, right here. This is my block. This is in South Florida, and most of the houses look something like this. You can see a very well-coiffed lawn and bushes that I'm not even sure what those are because they've lost all of their natural shape. And it's aesthetically beautiful, but ecologically, it's kind of a desert. And in South Florida, we have these things called palmetto bugs. Anybody who grew up in Florida was probably terrorized by palmetto bugs at one point or another. I know I was. And so you might be inclined to call the exterminator. And let's just say that these are a few people that called the exterminator to get rid of the bugs on their property within their house. And they don't like to get bit by mosquitoes in their garden. So let's go ahead and treat the lawn too. Now, I think this is probably a pretty conservative estimate. It probably looks more like this, right? So if you can imagine all of these households that are eliminating insects from their property, you're starting to create a big problem. Then put into the idea that we have this fear of something like Zika virus. So we start a neighborhood-wide campaign to eliminate mosquitoes. And pretty soon, there are no insects in our environment because we've eliminated them. Because don't be fooled, those broad spectrum insecticides to kill mosquitoes are very detrimental to all insects. This is a pretty densely populated area. So you can imagine, where are the ecosystem services provided by insects that we already talked about? Where are they happening? The answer is somewhere else. However, we have a few species that have brought people back around. This is a picture that my brother took. He lives in South Florida and he's become infatuated with monarch butterflies. So he grows milkweed or Asclepias, different species of Asclepias in his garden because he knows it is the only genus that this caterpillar can eat. It's the host plant for the monarch butterfly. And I'm sure you're familiar with this insect and the iconic journey that the monarch butterfly flies all the way down to Mexico and then comes back up eating milkweed all along the way, and the evolutionary relationship that it has with this particular plant, where it cannot use any other plant. This is the only host plant that these caterpillars can eat. So this is one species that is serving as an advocate for other insects to encourage people about the importance of caterpillars. That's right, caterpillars. I don't know if you've ever really thought of a caterpillar as essential to the landscape, but it really is. As it turns out, these caterpillars are really, really good at turning the energy of plants into protein and fat. In addition, they are really rich in something called carotenoids. And carotenoids, you remember your mother saying, eat your vegetables. Well, it turns out vegetables are very important, and caterpillars do a great job of eating all day long. They eat their vegetables. And so these carotenoids, which help your immune system, and they also, for birds, are very important because they give their feathers the bright colors necessary to attract their mate. This is a photo by Greg Clarkson. He's an excellent photographer in the Highlands area, and you can see that this robin's got a caterpillar and a worm. We always say the early bird gets the worm, but the truth is most of our terrestrial bird species are exclusively insectivores while they're feeding their young. And they need a lot of caterpillars to feed their young. They prefer caterpillars because, as I mentioned, they are little sacks of protein and fat and carotenoids that the birds need for healthy babies. And they're also soft bodies. So a bird can easily return to the nest and shove one of those things down its baby's mouth without hurting it. You can imagine something like a beetle with its sharp edges might not be the best food for the baby. And terrestrial birds really need caterpillars. It turns out that birds need thousands of caterpillars in order to successfully raise a clutch of baby birds. So you can see one really important thing to have on your property if you want birds, and incidentally, lots of other mammals and reptiles eat caterpillars as well. You want caterpillars on your property. Now, I mentioned just briefly that many insects have an evolutionary relationship with the plants that they eat. And this is another favorite one of mine that I like to talk about because it's very pertinent here on the Highlands Plateau. This is pipevine, and this is the pipevine swallowtail butterfly. Now, pipevine is the host plant for the caterpillars of this species. Caterpillars are the larval form of butterflies. And if you have a pipevine on your property, those hungry caterpillars will eat this thing down to the ground. And it's such a delight to see because this plant contains phytotoxins. It has toxins. Plants don't want to be eaten. So they develop secondary metabolism or secondary metabolites that make their leaves toxic to herbivores. But through the evolutionary history of these two, the insect and the plant, the insects have learned to compartmentalize the toxins and within their bodies, which then gives them protection for the rest of their lives. And as adults, after they've gone through the chrysalis stage, the adults maintain that protection as toxic. So birds won't eat them because they know that they're poisonous. And some other cool thing has happened. This is the eastern tiger swallowtail. And this particular butterfly has a different morph. It has a black morph. This could be it. I don't really know enough about it to be able to identify it exactly because they look just like the pipevine swallowtails. And so this species also gets protection from the pipevine because some of their members of that species look just like the pipevine swallowtails. Such a cool thing. And as I mentioned earlier, one of my favorite things to do now, I've planted this Monarda fistulosa right off my front porch, and it is a magnet for these butterflies. So I love to grab a glass of wine and go out there and watch those butterflies flutter around in the evening. North Carolina has a lot of butterfly species, and it's worthwhile to think about the plants associated with these species of butterflies and include them in your garden so that you can enjoy them too. Now, I would be remiss if I only talked about butterflies and I didn't talk about moths. So moths are not quite as iconic maybe as butterflies, but they can be equally as beautiful. They are typically active at night, and as a result, they're often killed or distracted by light pollution. So if you have lights that you keep on your property, you should consider putting them on motion sensors, because this light pollution is very detrimental to moth species. And moths are very, very critical to caterpillar production. Another thing you should consider is leaving your leaves. When the leaves fall off your trees in the fall, we're often too quick to rake them up. But species like this beautiful Luna moth overwinter in the leaf matter, and they often look just like a leaf. It's very hard to distinguish them. So if you're raking up your leaves and disposing of them, you're probably disposing of your beautiful species that you want in your garden. We've talked a little bit about pollinator habitat, and it's become a hot topic around. It's become very popular to put in pollinator gardens, which I think is absolutely wonderful. So let's talk about another species that's very important for pollination. And I know that honeybees get a lot of attention, and the colony collapse and honeybees on the decline, but this crisis has also brought a lot of attention to our native bee species that we have here in North America. There's over 3,500 species, and most of them are solitary. Most of them don't make honey. One exception to that would be the bumblebees, and we'll talk about those next, but bees are the pollinators. Their fuzzy little bodies are perfectly designed to pollinate our flowering plants. And we consider butterflies to be pollinators, but actually their body shape, they're more like flower visitors and not very effective pollinators. But bees are excellent pollinators. So we need our bees and we need to support them. As I just mentioned, bumblebees are pretty essential for pollination. They do something called buzz pollination, which makes them specifically excellent pollinators for species like blueberries that require vibration in order for them to release their pollen. And bumblebees are experts at that. We have about 26 different species of bumblebees here in North Carolina, and they are the only one of the very few social bees that we have. Most bees are solitary, which means they're not going to sting you because they don't have anything to defend. Bumblebees, while they're foraging on flowers, are very docile. The only time you might get stung by a bumblebee would be if you accidentally get too close to their nest. Their nests contain colonies, annual colonies of about 25 to 400 worker bees, and they are essential for our pollination services. Now, we can't have a conversation about bees without talking about our fear of being stung. So I want to make a distinction. These guys are not bees. These are yellow jackets, and that's a wasp. Those guys will sting you. They are predatory, they eat meat, and they are social. So they have hives that they defend, and they defend that by stinging you. So in contrast, bees eat pollen. They're very hairy, and most are solitary, as I mentioned, and they're excellent pollinators. Whereas wasps are meat eaters, they're not pollinators, and you can often identify them by their thin waists. I should also want to remind you that only female bees sting. So what are some of the threats that bees are facing? There's habitat loss. We talked about that a little bit. There are a lot of introduced pathogens that we have brought with the honeybee populations. We have land ethics problems here in this country. We have a lot of degraded habitat. Climate change is another threat for bees. And as we mentioned earlier, insecticide use is very detrimental for bee populations as well, because most of our solitary bees nest in the ground. So if you're spraying fertilizer or insecticide on your grasses, you're hurting your bee population, and that is not good. Let's move on to number 4. How can we create better habitat in our garden? I'm not a big one for hashtags, but I like this one. Beauty is no longer enough. And what I mean by that is that we can no longer exclusively plan and design our gardens for beauty alone. We need to include better habitat for the other species that we share this planet with. This is an idea that was brought forth by Doug Tallamy, and it's a really, really important point. We have wonderful native species here, so you don't have to give up beauty in order to plant native species, but let's talk a little bit about the ones that really matter. What recent studies have discovered is that not all native plants are best for habitat, for creating and promoting insect species. Turns out there are some keystone species that are more important than others. So like this keystone here that holds this arch together, these are the species upon which other species in the ecosystem depend. And if they were eliminated from your environment, the ecosystem would be drastically changed. So I'm going to talk about a few of them. The first is the mighty oak. It's known as the quintessential wildlife plant. More species utilize the oak tree than any other. Something like, I can't see the count back there, but I have it written down somewhere. Oh yeah, in our area, 488 different species utilize oak trees. So planting an oak in your yard is a great idea. If you don't have one yet, put an oak in. And I know a lot of you might be thinking, I don't have the energy to plant a big tree. They get to be huge. But oaks package their young in these convenient little containers called acorns. So the next time you're walking through the woods, pick up a couple acorns and throw them in your pocket and plant them in your yard. That diversity will be very helpful to your garden too. The next one I want to talk about is black cherry. Black cherry supports 362 different species of caterpillars and other insects. It's a wonderful one to have in your garden and has these pretty blooms on it. Sometimes it's an unappreciated species, but it turns out it is key to good habitat and the production of lots and lots of caterpillars. So if you would like to have bird species in your yard, like juncos and phoebes and blue jays and bluebirds, then you need to plant something like black cherry or that oak species. Willows are also Lepidoptera magnets. I have a species count here of 456, but that's nationwide. Here in our area, they support 279 different species of insects, so they're critical for habitat as well. Now let's talk about a few flowering plants. Goldenrod is one of my favorites, and at this point, if I'm designing a garden, I'm going to sneak some goldenrod in there somewhere. A lot of people don't like goldenrod because they think it aggravates their hay fever. But the truth is that the pollen grains of goldenrod are big and heavy and sticky and not airborne. They are pollinated by insects. Most likely your hay fever is being caused by ragweed, which blooms about the same time and is wind pollinated. So let's not give goldenrod a bad name. It's actually one of the keystone species that you really, really need to have in your garden. Another one is asters. Turns out asters are critical too, with many, many species exclusively dependent upon asters. And they're beautiful too. They come in all different shapes and sizes and are wonderful things to include in your garden. Sunflowers too play a really, really important role. 64 different species of insects are dependent upon sunflowers. There's lots of different types of sunflowers and all are great to include in your garden. There's another one. See, there's a little bee who's visiting that sunflower right now. Now, you may be a little overwhelmed by all of this information, but there's this excellent website called the Native Plant Finder that's been developed as a collaboration by many organizations and is put together by the World Wildlife Fund. I'll include this information later in the email, but you can go and put it in by zip code. I put in my zip code and this is what popped up. Goldenrod, strawberry, sunflowers, asters, and lots of different other plants. So if you're confused about what you want to plant, which ones will serve you best, use this website. It's a great resource. Now, I'm kind of a lazy gardener, I must confess. So I have discovered that the best way to encourage native species in my yard is to just let them grow, the things that are already there. This is my ditch garden, and it doesn't look like much now, but that's what it looks like later in the season. All of these plants, instead of weeding that ditch down, I just let them grow. And there is an abundance of native species, and these ditches become alive every summer with insects and birds and mammals and reptiles and amphibians. It's just a delight to watch. Here's another view of my ditch garden. That's what it looks like late summer. If you build it, they will come. Other ideas. Oh, I should also mention this, I'm sorry. This is an important factor too. Don't be too quick to clean up your garden in the fall. Most of our native pollinators and many species of other insects overwinter in your flower stalks or in the leaf litter that falls below them. So if you get in there in the fall and cut all of this stuff back and strip your landscape of all of its leaves, you're depleting your garden of the very essential insects that it needs. So don't be too quick to clean it up. There's a time for every season, and I personally think these old flower stalks are just beautiful. Some of this really, we need to change our perspective on our gardens. And beauty is no longer enough. That doesn't mean you need to compromise beauty, but you need to think wider. And then you get this, beautiful butterflies within your own garden. You can also put in little pocket gardens, pocket meadows with meadow species. It doesn't have to be a huge expanse. It can be small square footage, but pack it with those keystone species and you won't go wrong. This is a planting, I believe this is in Cashers. This is Liatris. So it can happen in urban environments. We just need to use more native plants in our landscape. And then you get beautiful gardens like that and that. And this brings me to my fifth and final point. We need to build a coalition of conservation supporters. We're so fortunate in our community to have some really great organizations that are filled with conservation professionals who can lend you advice and help you get started or moving forward. But it's not a one-way street. We have to support them too. Each and every one of us have our talents. So if you are an educator, get involved with the Highlands Biological Station. That's their mission, is education. If you're a doer, consider joining the Highlands Cashers Land Trust or the Highlands Plateau Greenway and get out there and help them remove non-native invasive species and plant new native species in their stead. There's something for all of us to do within this community, and we have wonderful resources at our disposal to do that. I also want to put in a plug for our local nurseries, many of which have native plants for sale. Chautauqua Gardens is a great example. Jeff Zahner would love to sell you native plants. He's the son of two strong conservationists, Glenda and Bob Zahner, and he has been a longtime supporter of the Highlands Cashers Land Trust. I guarantee you he would be delighted to sell you native plants over non-native plants. Similarly, Winding Stair Farm, which is down in Franklin, just put in a brand new native section that they're really excited about. You should go and visit them. I also want to say that don't hesitate to tell them to please stop selling non-native invasive plants. It's up to us. We need to vote with our dollars and ensure that everyone is doing their part. And really, that brings me to the end of my presentation today. I want to thank you for being here. If you made the time to join me today, that shows me that you're already a member of the choir. But it's important that you take these actions and to act as an advocate for the natural world. And I don't want you to walk away from here thinking these 5 things that I've talked about today are suggestions. I'd like you to take them for the moral imperative that I intend them to be. We must do these things. Time is running short, but it isn't too late. If we all act quickly and talk to other people and get them all to participate in our goals, we can make a huge, huge difference. So thanks for joining me today. I'll turn this back over to you, Anne.
All right, Sonya, thank you so much. I found your presentation so incredibly informative and inspiring. I think I know I got to wait a little bit until, I think they usually say Mother's Day, but it will definitely making a trip to the nursery and scouting out what native plants are available. And you definitely convinced me for more than one reason not to be bugged by the bees outside of my door and all the value that they bring. I just will remind everybody, I did have sent a message in the chat feature and got a couple of questions and comments. But if you do have any questions for Sonya, please type your question in to the chat feature, and I'll be asking Sonya the questions. I will remind you, if you missed the remarks I made at the beginning of the presentation, that you'll be receiving an email from me sometime in the next 2 days with a link to the recording of this program, which will also be on our YouTube channel. And so you can share that link with others that you think that might be interested in it. You can also encourage people to go to the YouTube channel and look, and I encourage you to do the same, not only at this particular program, but we have a library of other Village Nature Series programs, including one that's really just specific to bees. Those 26 species of bees that Sonya referenced, I mean, they go a deep dive into bees. So if you want to know more about bees and not just the honeybee, I encourage you to check out that particular program. It's called Buzzworthy Insects. I'll include all this information as well as some of the references and links to the sites that Sonya shared with us this evening in that email, so that you'll have that information. But I encourage you to return to this and refer to it. So much good information. I did have a question that one person had asked Sonya. They were interested in knowing, when they're rethinking their yards, which is best, pine straw, mulch, or neither?
Well, that is a great question. So in the last few weeks, we've had a pine straw crisis. We have had a shortage of pine straw within our community. And the best thing to answer the question, the long and the short, is the best thing to use are your own leaves. Do not rake up your leaves and dispose of them. Use them in your garden beds. That is the best way to support habitat for your native insects and your native plants. The leaves contain lots of nutrients that break down slowly and provide great organic matter. Now, if you don't have enough leaves for whatever reason, then I think hardwood mulch is the best thing to use. I don't like to use pine straw, I'll confess. Pine straw is brought in on 18-wheelers from somewhere else. So there's a carbon tax on our pine straw. It does not break down into good soil and often adds acid to our already acidic soils.
That's great. That's really, really good to know. And I'm guessing that most of that pine straw comes from Georgia, having lived there and all those tall pines. Sarah has a question, Sonya. If you're going to cut stalks in your garden, when is the best time to do that will have the least impact on insect habitat?
That is a great question, Sarah, and an important one. So I mentioned leaving your stalks as long as you can, but at some point you want to do some garden cleanup. If you can leave your stalks in your garden until the late spring, right about now, I cut back a lot of gardens within the last month or so. But if you can leave the stalks in place, then you'll ensure that the solitary bees and other insects that are overwintering within them stay in your garden. So keep those stalks on site. Don't dispose of them. They've got valuable passengers inside.
Yeah, there's no such thing as yard trash, is there?
No, no, it's all recyclable.
It all has a purpose.
Especially if you're using natives. It's
Exactly.
all important.
Exactly. I'm not seeing any other questions. I'll wait just a couple minutes to see if anybody else asks any other questions, but I would be remiss without Gary present to, you said something very important at the end in terms of conservation and a coalition of conservation-minded people. And that's one of the primary reasons that the Highlands Cashers Land Trust and the Village Green have come together as conservation partners, because that is both one of our organizational key values. We both have conservation in our core mission and values, and we like to say, it's Gary's tagline, that the whole purpose for the Village Nature Series is that we believe that an educated constituency makes educated decisions. And certainly the information that you have provided us this evening helps to further that education for our constituencies, so that we can make informed decisions about what we're going to put in our gardens, how we're going to treat existent plant material that's in our gardens, how we're going to respect our native pollinators, and just so many different ways to view this from a conservation standpoint. So we so appreciate that, what you've brought to us this evening, Sonya. I would just mention to you that that next month's program will be the last Tuesday of May, which I believe is May the 29th, without looking at a calendar, and I'm not able to access that electronically right now, but that will also be in the follow-up email that I send you with resources. I've had a few people request to be registered for all the programs, and unfortunately, to get the kind of unique, custom-tailored experience that you've had with this particular program, where you get the emails and the resources and the links, and you'll also get information about Sonya in that follow-up email. In order for me to be able to do that, you actually have to email me for each month's program so that I know that you're going to be in attendance. I did, however, if that's a little bit cumbersome for you and that email is not as important to you, you can go to the Village Green website, and you can find under the top menu selection, events. You can click on that. It'll take you to our calendar events, where you'll find information about next month's Village Nature Series, which is May the 26th. Thank you to Sandy for looking to check and see when the last Tuesday is. It is on the website, and there is a direct link to the Zoom presentation. So you don't have to email me in order to register for the program, unless you really want that customized experience. So the Zoom link is actually already on our calendar of events. I would just also plug for you, you'll find on the calendar of events, speaking of native pollinators, the Village Green is hosting the Jackson County Beekeepers. And they're going to be here on May the 22nd, and they're going to be celebrating National Bee Day. And as part of that National Bee Day, they're going to be doing a lot of education about all those different species of bees, and a little bit further of what Sonya has presented to us today about how you can attract those in your own yard, and how we need to respect them. So check that out on our website, and make plans to come to the Village Green on that Saturday. It's going to be a lot of fun. There are going to be a lot of kids events as well associated with that day, with that celebration. As always, I just want to remind you, we thank you for your generosity, and hope that you will be willing to support us with your contributions. You'll also find a link to how you can contribute on our website. We'll share it on social media, so that if you want to contribute to Village Nature Series, you can do that. Again, we appreciate the sponsorship of Cedar Creek Club in Cashers that helps to underwrite the cost of this programming. Thank you so much, everyone, for joining. We'll look forward to welcoming you again on May the 26th. And a special thanks to Sonya once again for this wonderful, wonderful Earth Day program. I think we can hold our heads high and celebrate our Mother Earth and our vitamin N as we go forth from today. So thank you, everybody, and have a wonderful, wonderful evening. Take care.
Good night.
Good night.